What's up? This is Tom Froming. We are going to talk about my grade for the offseason for the Twins and my record prediction for them for this season, the 2022 season. But before I get into that and really start digging in and analyzing things, I just want to say I'm really, really excited. Sometimes you don't have to analyze things beyond that. If you're a Twins fan that's excited, be excited. So anything that I'm going to say, this is sort of a disclaimer, but anything that I'm going to say here, if you don't let it ruin your excitement, that's for sure. So, and really, we're going to start out at the most exciting thing I think that happened this entire offseason anyway, and it's something I think a lot of Twins fans have forgotten about or aren't factoring into their sort of equation of this offseason. Because you think about additions and subtractions, the Byron Buxton extension, which happened on December 1st, that was the best move of the offseason, in my opinion, was signing Byron Buxton to the 7-year, $100 million extension. That's the guaranteed amount. He has the potential to make more than that with all sorts of bonuses and escalators and things like that based off playing time and awards voting. But that is a base average annual value of $14.28 million a season, which is laughably low for a guy of Byron Buxton's talent caliber who could be the league MVP if he stays healthy. Now, of course, that's a big if. We know that. But I loved this deal. It was just a knockout of the park. And it really set the tone for the rest of the offseason at that point. That was right before the lockout that got done. But if that deal didn't get done, it was very likely Byron Buxton was going to get traded. Perhaps not this offseason, perhaps at the deadline, but Byron Buxton wasn't going to be a Twin for much longer if that extension didn't happen. And I don't think a lot of the things that went down this offseason wouldn't have without that extension happening. So kind of wanted to lead off with that to be like, hey, let's not lose sight of this huge thing that happened outside of all the craziness, because there was a lot of that too. Second item I want to discuss is the Garver through Donaldson kind of through line that was going on. That was just very crazy, and when it was all done, it was hard to know what to think. I really did not like the Mitch Garver trade. My feelings on the Donaldson trade have changed some. I did expect that to be a sign of bigger things to come, so I was hesitant to really react too much to that deal in a vacuum. There really wasn't any reason for the Twins to be really motivated to dump his contract. However, we're talking about his ages 36 and 37 seasons that are coming up. So just because I felt like, he had been delivering on that deal, that he had been good enough to live up to that contract, things get sketchy when you're talking about the next 2 years of that contract. Obviously, what they ended up doing with that payroll flexibility also helps. If they were to do that move and then not really make a big splash after that, it would be hard to, justify that, I think. But I honestly don't think that they acquired Kiner Falefa with the intention of moving him, and that happened so fast. And there is no way they ever envisioned that they were going to be able to land Carlos Correa. That was not the plan. When they freed up that Donaldson money, it wasn't like, all right, now we're going to go get Correa. We were all thinking it was going to be Trevor Story, and they certainly went down that path. And then Correa just kind of happened to, I don't want to take any credit away from them, but it ended up that the other teams weren't interested in giving him like the 10-year, $300 million deal that guys of his caliber get. Corey Seager got a mega deal like that. And they led... we don't have to talk too much about Correa because it's already been covered enough, but you got to say it. The number one free agent on the market, they're paying him $35.1 million a season. So anybody that wants to complain about how the Twins operate, how they spend, whatever... I think it's very hard for anybody to object at this point. I understand it's a creative contract with multiple opt-outs. He may only be here for 1 year. I don't care. It is the best free agent on the market. And they're paying him $35 million. It's not like they got a deal on the guy. So tons of credit to the front office on that entire situation. And again, I don't think they were hatching a plan like if this is how we get Correa. They just kind of made moves to open up opportunities, and that opportunity just so happened to present itself to them. Whatever you think about that in terms of if they got better, how much better they got, I was find that just fascinating and had the best time watching it all unfold and was extremely entertained by this offseason. The offseason still feels incomplete. I'm recording this on Monday evening. It's entirely possible there's another big move coming. I wouldn't rule it out. It would be unusual, but this is an unusual offseason with the lockout. There are trades still being made. So it's entirely possible there's another trade coming. I'm not ruling that out, but as it is here we are, it feels incomplete because the rotation. So Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Dylan Bundy, Chris Archer. That is not a rotation that inspires a whole lot of confidence from me, to be honest. Sonny Gray, let's talk about that trade for a minute. I haven't touched on that. A great addition, a guy on a very team-friendly contract considering how he's produced. But it did cost them their most recent first-round pick. It did cost them, arguably, I think, the highest upside arm they had in their entire org. Now, Chase Petty is basically light years away from contributing at the major league level. There's a lot that can happen between now and when you'd project him to be in the major leagues. That's a win-now move, that trade. I would understand it more if they would have pushed even more chips into the 2022 on the table and tried to go for it a little bit more. So I think in a vacuum, adding Sonny Gray was great. The fact that it cost them such a nice piece, we know how hard it's been for the Twins to develop starting pitching, and this was finally a guy that they went out and got. They've been drafting so many bats in the first round. They finally drafted a first-round pitcher, and then they just flip him basically the first chance they get. So why didn't the rotation get addressed? Why weren't there more assets, pushed towards the rotation or a focus on improving that? I think a big part of it was sequencing. If you think about it, most of the starting pitching free agent market moved pre-lockout. And again, they didn't have Buxton signed until basically the lockout started. The Josh Donaldson trade didn't happen until after the lockout was over. Had the Twins known that they were going to extend Buxton and trade away Donaldson's contract, I bet they would have been way more aggressive on the free agent starting pitching market. Wouldn't have shocked me at all, but at the time they didn't know that, and there was no way to know that for sure. And by the time those moves were made, there really wasn't a whole lot left there. Almost nothing, really, At the end of the day, as a Twins fan, it doesn't matter. I'm still disappointed that they didn't do more to address the rotation. Just something to keep in mind on that. And again, we'll see. There's time. They might make a trade. So I asked on Twitter what grade people would give, and the response that had the biggest was A- or B+. I agree with that. Actually, I would give them an A- for this offseason. As frustrated as I am that the pitching staff didn't really get addressed, the Buxton extension is playing a big part in this grade for me. Again, I think that's something that people lose sight of. That carries a lot of weight in my grade. If we focus just on the additions versus the subtractions, it's more like a B for me. That's how much I like that Byron Buxton extension. Not only keeping Buxton in-house, but at such a reasonable price. For him was just a slam dunk, knock out of the park move. Clearly, getting Correa was incredible. He's the one guy on the market who could improve them the most, Carlos Correa, because they needed a shortstop. He's a tremendous defensive shortstop and a guy who can hit. They extended a guy who's a legit MVP candidate in Byron Buxton, in my opinion. He's got to stay healthy, clearly. And they signed the best free agent on the market. So I don't know how you could be upset with that as a Twins fan. I want to reiterate again, I'm very excited about what we saw. And I think I'm, thankful that this team has taken this approach. When you look around baseball, obviously there's teams like the Dodgers, super teams, teams like Texas that went out and spent like $1 billion this offseason. So I'm not saying like the Twins had the best offseason ever, but man, there's 30 teams. We got it pretty good. And you look at ask a Reds fan how their offseason was. Ask a A's fan how their offseason was. It's rough out there for some fan bases. So now I want to give a positivity prompt. If that's where you want to leave things off and just be psyched and amped up and excited, I don't blame you. We're going to talk about my record prediction now. Let's talk about some of the projections right now. So Fangraphs is projecting the Twins to be an 82-80 team, so just a little bit above 500. Baseball Prospectus, their PECOTA standings have them at an 86.5 and 75.5 record. It's a mathematical formula. They work with that. This will round up and say they're 87-win team. It's very positive there. The over-unders I've seen, the most recent one, I'm sure there's other places that might have it, but the over-under I saw was 81.5 wins. I'm going to tell you right now, there's no winners here. In what I'm going to give my prediction, but I hate making season-long predictions. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's a 6-month season. There's so much stuff that's going to happen. There's so many things that could happen. This is insane to try to do. And number two, it's just gonna piss you off. It's just gonna ruin your day or make you mad at me. But honestly, if I had to bet my house, I would bet the under. I would bet the Twins win under 81.5 games this year. I see more scenarios that result in this team being under 500 than I do in them being over 500. That doesn't mean I don't think they can do it. That I don't think they can be a winning team. They could win the division. This is an extremely high variance team. And I think there's a path to a good rotation. I think it's a narrow path, and basically everything has to work out right. But I don't think anybody would be very shocked if Bundy and Archer basically work out like Happ and Shoemaker did. Who would be really blown away by that? Probably the biggest thing. This is probably the biggest thing to where I could see them finishing below 500 is that this front office, whenever they've had, sort of an in-between, which is where I could see this team being around the trade deadline, maybe being like a spot out of the postseason or a handful of games out of the postseason. I think if it gets down to that, this front office to me feels more like they would probably sell because that's what they've kind of done in the past. You think about in 2017 when they went out and got Garcia, then traded him and Kinsler. They still won the wild card that year, but they were more inclined to sell than they were to buy. The year after that, with Eduardo Escobar being traded, I think they were about 8 games out, so it's not like they were in the thick of it, but they were within striking distance if they could have added pieces, I felt. But they figured they'd trade, Escobar had great value, they want to trade him. Again, this front office really focuses on value. And if this team is on the outside looking in, come the trade deadline, man, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to not trade Carlos Correa, to not trade Sonny Gray, to not trade Taylor Rogers, who's in the last year of team control. I really do think unless this team is in the driver's seat, gets off to a crazy hot start like in 2019, then I think, they're going to, obviously there wouldn't be any reason to sell then. But if they're sort of, in the hunt, we're hoping they add, I bet you they're going to sell. I just based off of how this front office is operated, it's just going to be too tantalizing. They're going to have great pieces to sell. So I wanted to put some concrete numbers on this to kind of give you an idea of what I'm thinking. At the top here is what I project as the current roster, and at the bottom is a hypothetical. We'll get to that in a sec. So currently, I see them as being around a 500 team. So, we think pre-deadline, there's probably about 100 games between now and the trade deadline. I didn't actually count it out. That's a rough estimate. So, if they're 500, I think, again, this front office is going to have a lot of incentive to sell. And it could be ugly because a lot of their best pieces are the guys who could be sold off. So that's how I kind of envision a scenario in which they get to 78 wins. This current roster does have an upside to be better than 500 before the deadline, but they also have kind of a downside to be worse than 500. So, this is me sort of splitting the difference and saying, let's just call them a 500 team and then kind of going from there. Now, the bottom one, it might seem crazy that the end record is so different, but I think if you look at it this way, you kind of can follow my logic here. If they can add an impact starter the next 2 days and be a little bit better, put themselves in a little bit more of a driver's seat for the playoff picture, might seem only crazy, only thinking a 3-win difference, but you're probably in the playoffs at that point instead of on the outside looking in. And honestly, I do believe with this front office,
we saw them buy and sell in the same season once. So I think that is a couple games could make a big difference. You're at an 86 win pace if you win 53 the first 100. At that point, maybe they're not going to be like buyers, like go for it buyers, big piece buyers, but they're certainly not going to sell anybody off. And that's how they could get to 87 wins. So that's kind of an example without even getting into all the high variance players fluctuation on the roster, just how I could see the season breaking out on how the front office plays things. So, if you're kind of trying to follow the logic of how I can be excited about this team, but also think they're going to finish below 500, that's the best way I could put it out for you.
So that was my talk again. Like, I myself am frustrated at myself now. I don't know why I even recorded this, because now I'm just pissed off because I'm not as excited as I was 10 minutes ago. I'm kidding. I'm still very excited. Happy baseball season. Thanks for checking this out. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Consider subscribing. And we'll talk again soon.